Welcome to your library, and as we meet today with Steve Anderson, Deputy Mayor of the town of Shelburne and author of Driven to Succeed. Steve, we're really happy to have you here today, and we really want to congratulate you on, first of all, writing a book and then having it published. We think that's amazing, and we're very happy, as I said, to have you here. And this book, it doesn't just outline your journey from the notorious, infamous Finch corridor, Jane Finch corridor, and becoming the first Black legal counsel, the TTC, and other people have heard you talk about this, and Deputy Mayor of the town of Shelburne, all firsts, all first. And those are just to name a few of your accomplishments and profiles, but it's a book that's about motivation.
Yes.
It's a book about inspiration. And I was going to say for our young people, but no, I think it's for everyone, Steve.
Yeah, that's a really great point that you raised, Rose. I think when I wrote this originally, I thought, I was really targeting this. They say when you write, you should have a target audience.
Right.
And I think at first I was thinking, for sure that this has to be for youth, right? To motivate and inspire them. But you're absolutely right, and the feedback that I've received has made it very clear to me that there's something for everybody, regardless of what age you are. And anybody could use hope and inspiration, right?
Absolutely. One question our patrons always like to hear answered is, what was your experience writing the book like? Could you elaborate a little bit on the physical writing, on how you did that, and what was your biggest challenge with this task?
To stay focused during the whole ordeal. I started writing this book during the pandemic, and I say to folks that this wasn't in the plan. I had other plans, just like many other people around the world had plans, and then the pandemic changed a lot of people's plans and really put things on hold. And it was during that time I had the opportunity to reassess, to prioritize, and to maybe take on things that I wasn't necessarily prepared to do. And lo and behold, the thought came that maybe I should write my autobiography. It was something that people had mentioned to me because I had done a number of speaking engagements, but just never had the time. The pandemic gave me that time. And so that's what got it going. The difficult part, again, was just really staying focused and being authentic during the entire journey. Because when you're doing an autobiography, you want to make sure that you're scratching below the surface so that it can resonate with the reader. And in doing that, it reminded me of some of the things that I had suppressed over a long period of time, some of the issues that I had buried and thought that they would stay buried. And so going back through this journey brought those issues back to the surface, and I had to deal with that as I was going through writing this book.
And exactly this segue into my next question, which is, how did you really feel emotionally putting yourself out there, exposing yourself and opening up by writing a book about all the experiences, and you haven't held back on anything here? And I think one of the questions I might throw in with that is, was it your successes, the fact that you had overcome some of these obstacles, did that make it easier for you then to go about opening up and as I say, exposing yourself, your inner self, I guess, in some ways?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say the accomplishments didn't make it easier. I think, Rose, and this, I think, people who are going to be watching this will probably agree. When you accomplish or you reach a certain stage in your life, the last thing you want to do is to be vulnerable to the extent and remind the world or let the world know about some of your disappointments and your failures and your setbacks. We want to project our current success and what we've worked ourselves up to. And so a lot of people will keep these things suppressed. And so the accomplishments didn't make it easier. To some extent, it made it harder, because I'm thinking to myself, I'm the deputy mayor now, I'm an accomplished lawyer at the TTC. Do I want people to know that my parents separated when I was in Jane and Finch? Do I want people to know that I was placed in ESL? And so that was a constant struggle, but the need to be authentic was important to me, because there are going to be people who read this that are going to see themselves in some part or the other in this book, and it was important that I was speaking to them as well. I was at the bookstore and signing these books yesterday, and then Jan, I was signing it and her back was turned to me. She was doing something on the shelf, and she goes, "Do you know that I lived in Jane and Finch for a period of time, and then moved to Don Mills, where my parents were, and I'm just like, whoa, where's this coming from? Like, really surprised. Then Karen Lang on my D&I committee here at the town of Shelburne wrote me an email and said that she lived in Jane and Finch in the 70s and then moved to Young and Steeles afterwards. And so it's as if this has given them permission to be like, and to claim and not feel ashamed, because here's this guy with his platform, and if he's okay with it, then I'm okay with it. And that's what I mean by authenticity.
Yeah.
When you are vulnerable, it's like a key that unlocks and gives people permission to now be free of the things that they've been hiding or felt ashamed of potentially.
That's really true. It's the authentic part of this that really is going to grasp and is grasping your audience. Everything I can see, and that leads me on to my next point here. You've made me into a Facebook junkie. But in trying to kind of come up with a little bit more about your life and what you're doing, I've started doing Facebook and checking up on you. And so
I appreciate that.
So I'm just astounded with the wonderful success it's had, the achieving the profile that you've had. You've spoken to so many organizations. You're here doing this with us. You've been at the Orangeville, the Coffee Books and Conversation.
Yes.
That we're part of that community. And the last one I noticed was this wonderful event with your mother at the Jane Finch Mall.
Mm-hmm.
And the awards that you've been giving out, and the honor that you give to your mother throughout all of this. So I think I'm following you. I'm not lurking or whatever those terms are on Facebook.
She's not trolling me.
No,
I think that's what she's trying to say. She's not trolling me.
That's the one. Anyway, a little follow-up to that question. We mentioned your mother. How do your children feel about this? Because in some way, it also touches them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, first starting with my mother, it was important, as they say, when people are alive, it's important to give them their flowers when they could smell it and receive it and enjoy it. And oftentimes, we look to people outside of our household for these heroes. And people like my mother, I refer to them as unsung heroes. They're never going to be the one that's going to be on television or in the history books. But it was important that I showed the world and the readers that she played such an instrumental part, and it was my opportunity to really put her on the stage that I felt that she deserved. And so going back and tracing that journey with her to the Jane and Finch Mall. The Jane and Finch Mall was important to us. This is where we grew up. We'd go shopping there together, a lot of memories there. And the fact that the Jane and Finch Mall decided to feature me there in their billboard inside the mall, it was just an important moment for us to go back and sort of relive our journey together. Mm-hmm. As I said when I posted on social media, that it was a celebration of our accomplishments, because success is never obtained, Rose, by oneself. It's a combination of individuals that played a role. For my children in particular, this was tremendously important because to me, I looked at writing this as a legacy piece for them. So long after I'm gone, they will have something that speaks of their father and them in a positive way, and it's something that they could hold on to and be proud about it. So that's why it was also important to highlight them, but to also leave this behind for them as well.
Okay, so as you know, obviously I've read the book twice, as a matter of fact. I've done my homework. And
I appreciate that.
I'm going through sort of your early years, and the first sort of really traumatic experience that hit you was your father leaving and the divorce and the support you needed to do. How did your other siblings feel about this? Were they also having trouble dealing with? I'm sure they did.
Yeah.
How did they?
Yeah, even you asking me now is just bringing back that whole time period and that experience. And the unfortunate thing, to answer your question, I don't know. At the time, I didn't know, because as I mentioned in the book, this wasn't something that we sat around the table and discussed. It happened, and nobody talked about it. It wasn't that, there was, hey, let's go around the table and, give your thoughts. Tell me how you feel. Do you think we need to bring somebody in to help deal with the emotions, etc.? None of that occurred. And so we were left to our own, devices, as they would say, to try to figure and navigate our way through. And it's no fault. I'm certainly not blaming anybody for that situation, particularly my mom. I could only imagine what she was dealing with. Sure. And she did her best to make sure that the household just remained normal. What is interesting is I never had the conversation then. And so when we talk about the importance of writing the book, when I started writing it, and then I would share with my siblings these chapters, in particular that one, for the very first time, they then began to open up about how they felt about the experience. And so the book was not only for the wider public, but it was a key that unlocked these conversations that we had never had as a family. So at the time I didn't know, but certainly I know now.
And that's interesting, because it was one of the points I'd written down here, is how did they basically everyone internalized
Correct.
it for a long time and didn't have a discussion or big confrontation about the whole experience. I think the next thing that jumped out at me that I thought was difficult to deal with was being put in the ESL class.
Yeah.
Oh, you know.
Yeah. I described that in great detail about being in homeroom amongst the other students, and then hearing that knock on the door and that teacher coming in and wishing I was invisible, and then hearing the students murmuring and laughing, where is he going, and all this other stuff. And so that was a troublesome time. It seemed like it was like a domino effect of things, right? It was the separation of the parents, and then I was in ESL, and it just seemed to be a snowball effect. But even in difficulties, there's triumphs, because the story starts rough, and one would think, oh, geez, this guy is doomed. But as you know in reading it, that things turned around, because I had a teacher, and this is a shout out to all educators, that believed and saw my potential, and before I knew it, within a short period of time, I moved and transitioned from ESL right to advanced English. So, I'm really thankful to Mr. Lin, that's his name,
yes.
for really putting in the time and seeing what I was truly capable of.
And so that led on, I was really inspired by that part as well. I've had some similar experiences that in my background too, and so I could relate a little bit, as that was very emotional for me reading that part of it. You had a lot of family support, but it was probably, again, still below the surface, perhaps all of it, but because then you started hanging out with some not so desirable people.
That's right.
And went sort of down that road for a little while. And then started looking at some reality checks and all that, and you had your friends help with that. How do you express that part of your life? How would you like to?
Yeah, and I really wanted to articulate that part in the book, because I know there are a lot of young people who are suffering emotional trauma for whatever reason. And certainly now during the pandemic, we know that many youths have been impacted by way of mental health. And so, and sometimes when we are in these precarious situations, we often lash out or do things that we're not accustomed to doing. And that's what happened with me, right? I was raised, I knew better, but because I was dealing with those emotions, this was my way of dealing with it. And I latched on, as I say in the book, to a group that had their own grievances and axes to grind. And the old saying is that misery loves company, and I found the right company at that point in time. It wasn't really good for me in sort of by way of my future progression, but certainly at the time it was helpful. But then, as a number of bad things happened, and finally I was able to turn things around, but it was that conversation with my mom and looking in her eyes after I got suspended, and the look of disappointment. And then, because I got suspended, I was at home for 3 days, and I had that conversation with her. And then after I got back from my suspension, it was like divine intervention. I met a whole new crop of friends who were ambitious, forward thinking. And what I say in the book is we spend a lot of time picking the right job, choosing the right spouse, where are we going to live? And it's just as important, especially as young people, that we choose the right friends who we're going to spend our time with, because they could take us from level 1 to level 9, or worse yet, maybe to the basement. And so for a period of time, that happened to me.
And that's actually part of what you've led right into exactly what I was going to say, but maybe taking a little bit further. What advice would you give to youth who do not have that supportive network? What can they do? And this is a conundrum for those.
Yeah. What could they do? Try to find that support system. First of all, I think you yourself, it has to start with you. There's the old saying that you could bring a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. And so you could have all the great people around you speaking positivity to your life, all they want, but if you're not prepared to listen and act on it, then it goes nowhere. And so I think at some point you have to look around and say, I may not be in the best situation, but it's time for me to pull up my socks and try to do something about it. And when you're make that decision, you're prepared to do that, then you will start looking for that network system and those friends, and be careful in your selection and bring the right people around you that's going to help you to accomplish your goals. So I say to them, hold on, because there is hope around the corner. And I once found myself in difficult situations, but I often say, because you find yourself in difficult situations, it doesn't mean that you have to stay in them.
So we talked about you moving from ESL to advanced English, and this is an interesting thing that we've noticed, or an interesting aspect of the book. It's full of literary quotes and references which hint at the theme of each following chapter. Have you always had that love of literature, and what role have books played in your life?
Yeah, and this was why it was shocking to me why I was actually placed in ESL, because I loved reading, and I was reading at a high level when I was in public school. But books, especially in the environment that I was in, was a great escape. It was something that I could get immersed into and live another life that was far different than the one I was currently living. And so it gave me an opportunity to increase my vocabulary, to learn about different things. The scope of the reading, the breadth of the reading that I undertook at the time allowed me to be well-versed and to really appreciate the work that goes into actually writing a story. And so books played a tremendous role, especially as a young person during those difficult times. And they continue to play. And that's why I say that, maybe other than some people may say the church, I believe that the library is really one of the main gems in the hearts of the community because of the books that people are able to read.
I'm going to gloss over the next little bit. It's through your high school period of time and your university, but not so much. There is the MVP incident.
Oh, no.
My God, what a lot of
Rose, are we
insights.
going there?
Not for very long. I
Okay.
promised I'd gloss over it. But I can understand that. You wanted your brother to be proud of you, and I can see that. So that was one part of it. But how do such experiences inform your confidence and your outlook after? So it happened, it was crushing, and how did that help you grow?
Yeah, and that chapter in particular was, how to be a better leader or a good leader.
Yes.
And it was lessons of leadership. I talked about earlier about having these set of friends that really made me feel like, I am somebody, I can be somebody. And, it had me feeling like I was a leader, but I had a very narrow definition of leadership. Leadership to me at the time was, if I do really well for myself and hoard these accomplishments, then I must be a leader to be emulated and followed by others. What I quickly learned in this basketball experience was that it's more than that. It's about elevating others to allow them to be their best selves as well. Nothing wrong with improving yourself, but a true leader not only improves themselves, but the people around them.
So moving on to the next section, the incredible achievement of going to the University of Windsor and getting there, all the little life lessons that you learned and thought were good, the laundry, the cooking, all of that. And then all of a sudden, in the midst of some wonderful experiences, things turned a little differently for you in the sense of the responsibilities. Here you came, this kid went to the University of Windsor, met a wonderful woman, and all of a sudden, here you are faced one child, which was, of course, sort of an eye-opener, a challenging time. I couldn't help but think about the wonderful support you received at that time, it seems, from both families. So that was great. And then your second child thereafter. So that was a difficult time. And going through that, what were some of the thoughts that came to you that would be helpful to other people, maybe?
Never give up. Right? We stayed, as I mentioned in the book, we stayed focused on our goals. Education was very important to us, and thankfully, because we had the network of people around us, we were able to continue our education and show our kids how much we valued it. But once again, I say that obstacles and challenges in life, you don't have to grow up in Jane Finch to understand obstacles and challenges. So it's inevitable for everybody. It's how we respond to them that determines our future and our legacy. And so we responded to that challenge. It was a blessing to us, but yet still it was a challenge. And so, as you mentioned, thankfully we had that support system. So to those who find themselves in that situation, because I say in the book, one child would be enough to derail many people from university, much less having two. But thankfully, we were able to continue and pursue our education without having to take that break, and I think we've been better for it.
Well, that's interesting to hear that you express that from your perspective, because it is difficult for some people. But then you move on, you get your degree, and then you take this leap to go to university, to law school in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And as if that wasn't enough, you had a great successful first year. You came to Ottawa, doing all kinds of interesting things to get there, I guess is one way of putting it, but I'll let people read the book to find out. And then finding out that that was really the place where you wanted to be, in Ontario, in Canada, in Ottawa, back home, and sort of, in familiar territory in some ways with your family, and all the things that had to be done, and the support you had to accomplish that. So just paraphrasing that particular little section of your life. And then I'm just going to fast forward. After all that, legal counsel for the TTC. Tell us about that, the feeling of that accomplishment.
That was like winning the lottery. Here I am, a kid that grew up in Jane and Finch. I would take the 35 Jane bus from Jane and Eddystone to Jane Station every weekend to go attend church services with my mom and the rest of my family. I would be excited to get on the bus, even though I didn't like getting up early in the morning because I prefer to watch cartoons, but hey, I got used to it. But then when I got on the bus, I was excited to be on it. And I talk about in the book, I had this image of me wearing that iconic blue shirt and the brown pants and the red tie and, being an employee for the TTC. And now many years later, I say at the time I was depending on these bus drivers to take me from point A to point B. And now here I am as a lawyer where they're now depending on me to represent them in court. And so the whole ordeal was just really something surreal and difficult to digest at one point, to believe that I'm actually here working for this iconic institution.
That's a wonderful achievement, in every respect, and all the firsts, another first, of course, again. And then again, fast forward to moving to Shelburne, Ontario. I think how old were your children then? I was trying to, I didn't do the mental calculation.
So
it was 2014, I think.
Yeah, so they would have been in their teens for sure at that point. So not very, very young, but moving to Shelburne was like the new frontier.
Yes.
I was on the board of the enterprise. It was a community that I didn't know anything about, and literally I stumbled on it. I was thinking about buying a house in Brampton, and I was on my lunch. And I'd always pick up this new home magazine, they would call it, just to see where the new projects were and the homes being built. And right on the cover, it said, save $250,000, that's 35 minutes north of Brampton. I'm thinking, where is this place? I got to jump in my car and find out. And lo and behold, there's a commercial. You might be too young to remember this, Rose, but there was a commercial back in the day. It's worth the drive to Acton.
Oh, yes, no, I remember Acton.
The old High House.
Yes.
It was worth the drive to Shelburne, and here I am now many years later.
Yeah. And Shelburne is so fortunate that you took that drive, just that short little drive. And then moving on, the race, all of those moments, taking Councillor Tom Egan's place.
Big shoes to fill.
Big shoes to fill, but that has worked out well. And I can only think of your experience waiting for the results of the vote for deputy mayor. Like that's pretty.
Yeah, talk about a roller coaster ride at Wonderland. I talk about wanting to be alone at that time, the phone ringing and not answering it, or when I did, and like, listen, I don't know yet, like, just leave me alone. I just want to find out in peace, and because if it's a disappointing result, I just want to be able to digest it myself. And so waiting for it to come in was something that I had never gone through before, but at the end, clearly it was rewarding.
Yeah. A couple of questions that still come to mind, that not necessarily following, although as deputy mayor and as we in the library, we're searching and looking for ways to touch our teenagers. What can we do to get our teenagers to respond to our programs and so on? And I'm sure you are thinking about that all the time, because you have all these new teenagers here. And it must be a question that the town has as well. What can we do for our teenagers?
One is to reach out to them and hear, the things that they're looking for. I think oftentimes as adults, we think we know what's best for them. So hearing from them, I think, is very important. And then being flexible enough to be able to respond to what we hear. And I believe you and Jade and your team here at the library has done an excellent job of listening to the community and our youth in particular, and doing your very best to ensure that what I call the heart of the community, being the library, is inclusive and welcoming, so that students know that this is a safe space for them to come and to learn and to also see themselves. I know that you and your team have done an excellent job in making sure that the reading materials are inclusive, and so that people again could feel that sense of belonging in the community. So it's things like that, and certainly as elected officials, I believe representation matters. So when people see a person like myself in leadership, it also encourages them to know what is possible. So there are many different things that we could do, but if we're all pulling in the same direction and we believe in the same goal, I think our young people will be better for it.
So I think I'm winding down to maybe my last question. And I'm not sure it's a question, it's more of an observation. I've read the book, I've gone through it carefully, I've had the opportunity to listen to you speak, and there's something that stands out, and maybe for me, you've been touched by the number of traumas, crises that we've highlighted throughout, and yet, and I think that's the good part of this book, I think that's the kernel, or that's the gem in this book. I never ever myself saw a sense of despair. I saw some low periods, but there was always that rising up. Is that?
Yeah, and that was, I got that from watching my mother, and this is the reason why I honor in the way that I do. And there's a chapter in the book that I hope everybody gets a chance to read, so that they too could honor the people who have made significant contributions in their life. But when I watched her make the sacrifices that she did, never complained despite being in a situation of despair, and I can only imagine, as I write in the book, there were times where I thought, is she delusional? Why is she not demonstrating or showing this emotion? And I talk about, if she had spoken negatively about my father at the time, I certainly would have joined the chorus at the time. But she never did that. She went about her business, in a methodical way, made sure the environment we were taking care of, made no excuses. And so who am I then, after seeing that, to make excuses for any situation that I find myself in? So yes, it was challenging, but we all have challenging times in our life, and it's our obligation to respond in a way that we're able to overcome and be an inspiration to others. And that's the reason why I shared my journey in this book.
And that's what I see, that hope, and it comes out loud and clear in your book. So Steve, thank you so much for coming in to talk to us today. Thank you very much on behalf of the community.
We want to thank everyone for participating in another one of our virtual programs. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.